The ceramic plates felt heavier tonight. I stacked them along my left forearm, the practiced motion of someone who had been carrying trays and balancing dishes for 6 months now, letting the weight settle into muscle memory. The kitchen of Ristorante Bellissimo hummed with its usual Thursday evening rhythm, pans clattering, Chef Marco's sharp Italian commands punctuating the sizzle of meat hitting hot skillets. The air hung thick with garlic, basil, and expensive olive oil, scents that clung to my uniform long after my shifts ended. My feet throbbed in the practical black shoes I'd bought secondhand, each step a small reminder of how different my life had become. 3 tables needed clearing before the VIP section arrived. Marco had been explicit about that, his thick accent carrying an edge of anxiety I'd only heard a few times before. "Important guests," he'd said, his hands gesturing wildly. "Very important. You understand, Sarah? You make no mistakes tonight." I understood. I'd been making no mistakes for half a year now, perfecting the art of being invisible, unremarkable. Just another server in another Italian restaurant in Brooklyn, the kind of place where mob families celebrated birthdays and business partners sealed deals over tiramisu and grappa. The red leather booths had seen more secrets than confessions, the exposed brick walls absorbing whispered conversations in Italian, Russian, sometimes Mandarin. The weight in my lower back pulsed with familiar discomfort. I'd spent 7 years at Langley perfecting surveillance techniques, learning 17 ways to neutralize an armed combatant, mastering the nuances of espionage tradecraft. Now I used those same skills to remember which table ordered their pasta al dente and who wanted extra parmesan. The irony wasn't lost on me. I pushed through the swinging kitchen doors, balancing the tray with the kind of grace that came from training most people would never recognize. To the patrons, I was just efficient. To myself, I was calculating exit routes, noting which customers carried concealed weapons, identifying the security personnel trying to blend in with expensive suits and practiced casual postures. Table 7 was easy. A couple celebrating their anniversary, the woman's eyes soft with wine and affection, the man's hand covering hers on the white tablecloth. Normal people living normal lives, unaware that the server clearing their plates had killed 3 men in Yemen before her 28th birthday. My therapist at the agency, before everything went wrong, had told me I needed to process the violence, find ways to compartmentalize without dissociating completely. I'd done exactly that, putting Sarah Mitchell, the operative, into a locked box somewhere in my mind, and becoming Sarah Mitchell, the server. Different woman, different life, different rules. The restaurant's warmth felt suffocating compared to the October cold outside. Through the large front windows, I could see leaves scattering across the Brooklyn sidewalk, people hunched into their coats against the wind. 6 months ago, I'd arrived in this neighborhood with $300, a fake ID that cost me $200, and skills that had to stay hidden or risk drawing exactly the attention I'd fled from. Marco appeared at my elbow, his face flushed from kitchen heat and nerves. "The VIPs. They arrive in 15 minutes. You take section 4, yes?" The private dining room in back. Very clean, very professional. I nodded, swallowing the instinctive protest. Section 4 meant the isolated space where the restaurant conducted its most sensitive business. Soundproofed walls, separate entrance, and clientele who valued discretion above all else. I'd avoided that section for months, keeping to the main dining room where witnesses and crowds provided a buffer against recognition. But Marco's hand on my shoulder carried the weight of necessity. "Sophia called in sick," he explained, his accent thickening with stress. "I need someone I trust. You never make problems, Sarah. Always reliable. Trust." The word felt like ash in my mouth. The last person who'd trusted me was Special Agent David Chen, my partner during the Istanbul operation. I'd gotten him killed through arrogance and bad judgment, watching him bleed out on a hotel bathroom floor while extraction was still 20 minutes away. The agency had called it operational failure. I called it what it was. My fault. "I need to change then," I said, gesturing to my standard uniform. The private section required different attire, more formal presentation. Marco nodded, already turning back to coordinate the kitchen's timing. The staff changing room was barely larger than a closet, smelling of cleaning supplies and the cigarettes some servers snuck during breaks. I peeled off my basic black uniform, replacing it with the nicer version reserved for VIP service. Black pants instead of the skirt, a crisp white shirt that buttoned to the collar, a black vest that gave the ensemble an almost masculine formality. In the mirror, I looked exactly like what I was trying to be. Invisible, professional, forgettable. I'd cut my hair shorter last month, changed from the long dark waves I'd maintained at the agency to a practical shoulder-length cut that required minimal maintenance. No makeup beyond basic foundation to hide the shadows under my eyes. No jewelry except the cheap watch I'd bought at a drugstore. Nothing that would make anyone look twice. My reflection stared back, and for a moment, I saw the operative I'd been. Sarah Mitchell, who could field strip a rifle in 30 seconds, who spoke conversational Arabic and passable Farsi, who'd infiltrated a terrorist cell in Damascus and extracted intelligence that prevented an embassy bombing. That woman seemed like someone else entirely now, a character in a story I'd stopped telling. The private dining room had been prepared with Marco's usual obsessive attention to detail. Candlelight softened the exposed brick walls, and the table settings gleamed under carefully positioned lighting. Fresh flowers, probably replaced twice today, sat in a crystal vase as the centerpiece. The room could seat 12, but tonight's reservation was for 4. I checked the setup methodically, my training reasserting itself despite my efforts to suppress it. Exit routes: main door, kitchen door, emergency exit through the back hallway, potential weapons, heavy candlesticks, steak knives at each setting, the marble serving station against the far wall. Sightlines: 1 security camera in the corner, angled to cover the table but not the entrance. Old habits, ones I couldn't quite kill no matter how hard I tried. The door opened and Marco ushered me out with urgent gestures. "They're here," he whispered, his face pale now. "Remember, professional. Quiet. Whatever you hear, you forget immediately." I understood what he was telling me without saying it explicitly. This restaurant had survived for 40 years in a neighborhood controlled by organized crime because everyone knew how to keep their mouths shut and their eyes on their own business. I moved into the hallway as voices approached from the private entrance. 3 men in expensive suits, their conversation casual, but their eyes sharp, scanning everything with the awareness of people accustomed to danger. Security personnel, obviously, though they carried their weapons with the kind of expertise that suggested military or federal training. Behind them walked a 4th man, and my blood turned to ice. Samuel Rossi. I knew that face, not personally. We'd never met, never operated in the same spaces. But I'd studied it in briefings, seen it in surveillance photos, memorized the details during an operation 3 years ago, when the agency had been building a case against his organization. Mafia. Old-school Brooklyn crew with connections to families across the eastern seaboard. Arms trafficking, extortion, money laundering through legitimate businesses including, apparently, Ristorante Bellissimo. He was older than his photos, probably mid-50s now, his dark hair silver at the temples. But he moved with the confidence of a man accustomed to absolute authority, his tailored suit fitting perfectly over what was still clearly an athletic build. His face had the weathered look of someone who'd lived through violence and emerged powerful because of it. I turned my face away reflexively, decades of tradecraft screaming at me to avoid recognition. My heart hammered against my ribs, adrenaline flooding my system in the old familiar rush. Breathe. Stay calm. He doesn't know you. There's no reason he would recognize someone from a surveillance operation years ago. Marco appeared at my side, gripping my elbow perhaps harder than necessary. "You serve them now," he said quietly. "Water, wine, bread to start. Then I take the orders myself. You just serve and clear. Understand?" I understood. My hands were steady as I filled the water glasses, steadier than they had any right to be. The four men settled into their seats, their conversation flowing in Italian too rapid for me to follow easily. I placed the glasses with practiced efficiency, my eyes down, my movements economical and unremarkable. Just another server, just another evening, just another table. Until Samuel Rossi looked up and said, "Thank you," and I met his eyes for one fraction of a second too long. His expression changed. Not recognition. Not yet. But something registered. Some instinct that I'd seen in operators and criminals alike. The sense that something wasn't quite right about the picture in front of them. His gaze held mine for a heartbeat longer than normal, his eyes dark and assessing. Then I looked away, moving back toward the kitchen door with movements I forced to remain natural and unhurried. My back tingled with the awareness of being watched. That specific sensation of someone's attention focused with intention, rather than casual observation. This was bad. This was very, very bad. The first course went out without incident. Marco handled the service personally as promised, while I stayed in the background, refilling glasses, clearing plates, trying to be invisible while my mind raced through contingencies. If Rossi recognized me, if he knew about the Istanbul operation, if any of his people had connections to the intelligence community that had flagged my disappearance. The dinner progressed. 3 courses, wine, espresso. I moved through the routine automatically, my training carrying me when conscious thought threatened to fracture into panic. They talked business in that casual way men do when violence is just another line item in their negotiations. References to shipments, percentages, territory agreements that anyone with experience could decode into criminal enterprise. I heard it all, absorbed it all, and began desperately trying to forget it all. Then the front entrance of the private dining room exploded inward. 3 men, masked, moving with military precision. Not police. Wrong tactics, wrong equipment. The lead one had a gun up before Rossi's security could react, and my body moved before my brain registered the decision. 24 months of forced retirement vanished in an instant, and I was across the room, my hand grabbing a steak knife as I went. The first attacker never saw me coming. I drove the knife into the nerve cluster at his shoulder, disrupting his motor control and sending his weapon clattering to the floor. The second turned, training his pistol toward me, and I swept his legs, using his momentum to slam him into the marble serving station hard enough to crack bone. The third started to run, but Rossi's security personnel had recovered now, and the narrow hallway offered no escape. I stood in the center of the private dining room, breathing hard, the knife still in my hand, my server's vest splattered with the first attacker's blood. And every person in that room was staring at me, with expressions ranging from shock to calculation. Samuel Rossi rose slowly to his feet, his dark eyes fixed on me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. He smiled, but it was the kind of smile that promised complications rather than relief. "Well," he said softly in perfect English, his voice carrying the particular quality of a man who'd just discovered something valuable. That was certainly not standard server training. The silence stretched like pulled glass, fragile and sharp. My hand still gripped the steak knife, blood dripping slowly onto the polished hardwood floor. The 2 attackers I'd neutralized weren't moving, one unconscious, one groaning and clutching his shattered collarbone. The third lay face down in the hallway, restrained by Rossi's security team with the efficient brutality of professionals. Samuel Rossi hadn't moved from his position beside the table. He studied me the way a collector examines a painting, head tilted slightly, eyes tracking details most people would miss, the way I held the weapon, the positioning of my feet, the controlled breathing that came from years of combat training rather than panic. Marco burst through the kitchen door, his face sheet white, hands raised in a gesture of helpless apology. "Mr. Rossi, I swear to God I had no idea. She's just a server. She's been working here 6 months. Always quiet. Never any problems." His voice climbed toward hysteria. "I don't know what happened. I don't know who she is. Samuel raised one hand, silencing Marco without a word. His attention never left me. "What's your name?" he asked, his tone conversational despite the violence that had just erupted in his private dining room. "Sarah Mitchell," I answered, because lying now seemed pointless. The name on my fake ID, the one I'd been using since I'd disappeared from the agency's safe house in Virginia. "No." His smile widened slightly. "What's your real name?" My throat tightened. "That's my real name." He moved then, crossing the space between us with measured steps. His security personnel shifted, hands drifting toward concealed weapons, but he waved them back with casual authority. Up close, Samuel Rossi was more imposing than surveillance photos had suggested. Not tall, perhaps 5'10", but built like someone who'd spent decades maintaining physical readiness. His cologne was subtle, expensive, mixing with the metallic scent of blood in the air. "People with server training don't disarm armed attackers in 3 seconds, he said quietly, his eyes locked on mine. "They don't move like operators. They don't assess threat levels and select targets based on tactical priority." His hand reached out slowly, giving me time to react, and pluck the knife from my grip. So I'll ask again. "What's your real name? And who trained you?" The weight of the situation pressed down on me like physical force. Every instinct screamed to run, but Rossi's security had positioned themselves at both exits. The man I'd put down with the knife was being helped to his feet by one of the dinner guests, blood soaking through his sleeve. Outside, I could hear sirens approaching. Someone had called the police. "Sarah Mitchell," I repeated, keeping my voice steady. "I was in the Army, military police. That's where I learned to fight." "Which unit?" The question came immediately, delivered with the precision of someone who knew how to spot a lie. "I don't have to answer your questions," I said, trying to inject strength into my tone. "Those men attacked you. I helped. You should be thanking me, not interrogating me." "Oh, I am grateful." His voice carried amusement now, dark and unsettling. "You saved my life, probably, and my associates' lives as well. That kind of debt requires proper acknowledgement." He gestured to his security chief, a broad-shouldered man with a scar running along his jaw. "Vincent, make sure our failed assassins are properly secured, and handle the police response." Vincent nodded, already moving toward the hallway. The sirens were closer now, maybe 2 blocks away. I watched as Rossi's people worked with practiced efficiency, phones out, making calls in rapid Italian. They were establishing a narrative, I realized, creating a story that would satisfy the authorities without revealing too much about what had actually happened. "Marco," Samuel said, turning to the terrified restaurant owner, "take the evening off. Close the main dining room. Tell the other patrons there was a gas leak in the kitchen. Nothing serious, but we need to evacuate as a precaution. Make sure they all leave satisfied. Generous discount on their meals. Bottle of wine to take home." Marco bobbed his head frantically, already backing toward the door. "What about Sarah? Should I fire her? Should I—" "Keep her on the schedule," Samuel interrupted smoothly. "She's proven quite valuable. I may need her services again." The implication hung in the air like smoke. I wasn't being fired. I was being claimed. The police arrived with the expected chaos. Flashing lights painting the brick walls blue and red. Officers in tactical gear clearing rooms with weapons drawn. But Vincent had worked quickly. By the time the first officer entered the private dining room, the scene had been sanitized. The attackers were gone, removed through the back entrance. The blood had been wiped up. The broken marble serving station had been covered with a tablecloth. Samuel stood near the window, phone to his ear, the picture of a concerned citizen who'd been dining when masked intruders burst in. His story was simple, rehearsed, completely plausible. 3 men, faces covered, demanded money and valuables. His security team engaged them. The attackers fled before anyone could be seriously hurt. Yes, he'd be happy to provide statements. No, he didn't recognize any of the assailants. Just random violence, unfortunately common these days. I stood against the wall, my server's vest now hidden under a coat Vincent had provided, trying to look like exactly what I was supposed to be. A frightened employee who'd witnessed something traumatic. The officer who interviewed me was young, eager, asking questions from a notepad with careful printing. Did you see their faces? No, they wore masks. Did they say anything? I don't remember. It happened so fast. Did anyone get hurt? Mr. Rossi's security team scared them off before they could do anything. The lies came easily. Muscle memory from years of operations where truth was currency to be spent carefully. The officer wrote everything down, assured me that I was safe now, suggested I might want to speak with a counselor about the trauma. I nodded at appropriate moments, played the role, and counted the seconds until he left me alone. 2 hours later, the restaurant was empty except for Rossi's people. The police had taken their statements and departed, satisfied with the narrative they'd been fed. The main dining room stood dark and silent, chairs stacked on tables, the lingering smell of dinner mixing with cleaning solution. I'd tried to leave 3 times. Each time, Vincent or one of the other security personnel had politely but firmly suggested I wait. "Mr. Rossi wants to speak with you," they'd said. "It won't take long. Please, have a seat." So I sat in the darkened dining room, watching through the windows as Brooklyn went about its Thursday evening. People walking dogs, couples heading to bars, normal life proceeding without awareness that 20 feet away, a former CIA operative was being held by the man she'd once been assigned to investigate. Samuel emerged from the private dining room at 11:30. He'd changed clothes somehow. The blood-spattered suit replaced with casual slacks and a dark sweater. He carried 2 glasses and a bottle of whiskey that probably cost more than my monthly rent. "Drink?" he offered, sitting across from me without waiting for permission. "I don't drink on the job. You're not on the job anymore." He poured 2 generous measures, sliding one across the table. "Tonight, you became something else. Something more interesting than a server pretending to be ordinary." I stared at the amber liquid, my reflection distorted in its surface. "I don't know what you think you know about me. I think you're former military or intelligence." His tone was matter-of-fact, analytical. "Your fighting style shows multiple disciplines. Krav Maga, probably, with elements of military close-quarters combat training. You assessed the threat and responded with lethal force without hesitation. That's not something people learn in basic self-defense classes. A lot of people have military training." "True." He sipped his whiskey, eyes never leaving my face. "But most of them don't end up working as servers in Brooklyn restaurants. Most of them don't hide their skills so completely that even someone like Marco, who's run this place for 20 years and knows how to spot law enforcement, didn't realize what you were. What do you want from me?" I kept my voice level, refusing to confirm or deny his assessment. Samuel leaned back in his chair, the leather creaking softly. "Those men tonight, they weren't random attackers. They were professionals sent to kill me. This is the 3rd attempt in 6 months. Someone wants me dead, and they're getting bolder." His fingers drummed against the table, a rare sign of agitation in his otherwise controlled demeanor. "I have security, obviously. But Vincent and his team are muscle. They're good at what they do, but they think like soldiers. They react to threats. And you want someone who thinks like an operative," I finished, seeing where this was heading. "Someone who anticipates threats before they materialize." "Exactly." He smiled, pleased I'd understood so quickly. "You saved my life tonight. That kind of skill, that kind of training, it's rare, valuable. I'd like to hire you. I'm not for hire." The words came out harder than intended. "I left that life. I'm not going back." His expression shifted, sympathy mixing with calculation. I understand the desire to disappear, to leave violence behind and pretend you can be normal. His voice dropped lower, almost gentle. But we both know that's an illusion. Whatever you're running from, whoever you used to be, that person doesn't vanish just because you want them to. The truth of his words struck deeper than I wanted to admit. 6 months of pretending hadn't erased the nightmares, hadn't stopped me from mapping exit routes in every room, hadn't made me forget David Chen bleeding out while I held pressure on wounds I couldn't close. "I'm not interested," I said firmly, standing up. "Thank you for the drink, but I need to go home." Vincent appeared in the doorway as if summoned. "Mr. Rossi, we have a problem." Samuel's attention shifted immediately. "What kind of problem?" "The men we caught tonight. They talked before we turned them over to our contacts. Someone paid them $50,000 to kill you. They were told you'd be here tonight, at this specific time." His jaw tightened. "Someone inside your organization provided the information." The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Samuel's face went very still, the kind of stillness that preceded extreme violence. Who? They didn't know. The contact was arranged through an intermediary. But there's more. Vincent's eyes flicked to me, then back to his boss. They were told about her too. Not by name, but the description matches. Former intelligence operative working as a server. They had orders to eliminate her as well, if the opportunity presented itself. My stomach dropped. That was impossible. No one knew who I was. I'd been careful, paranoid even. Every detail of my new identity had been crafted to withstand scrutiny. Samuel rose slowly, his whiskey forgotten. How would anyone know about Sarah, unless they've been watching her? Watching this restaurant specifically. Or unless someone recognized her from before. Vincent's voice carried an edge I didn't like. Someone who knew what she looked like, what she was capable of. Someone who understands that having an operative hidden in your regular routine represents an opportunity, or a threat. The implication was clear. I'd been compromised. Whether through bad luck or deliberate exposure, someone knew I was here. Someone who wanted both Samuel Rossi and me dead. Samuel turned to me, his expression unreadable. "Looks like you don't have a choice anymore, Miss Mitchell. Whoever wants me dead knows about you now. They'll come for you whether you work for me or not." His voice carried the weight of absolute certainty. "At least if you're with me, you'll have protection, resources, a chance to find out who's hunting us both." I wanted to argue, wanted to insist I could disappear again, run farther, hide better. But I'd been in intelligence long enough to recognize when the situation had shifted beyond my control. The attackers knowing about me wasn't coincidence. Someone had done deep research, connected dots that shouldn't have been connectable. Someone who had access to classified information about former agency personnel. "What exactly are you proposing?" I asked, hating how defeated I sounded. Samuel's smile returned, though it carried none of the warmth it might have suggested. "You become my personal security consultant. You live in my residence where Vincent's team can provide proper protection. You use your skills to identify who's trying to kill me, and why." His voice hardened. "And in return, I use my resources to find out who compromised your identity, and ensure they can't do it again." It was a trap dressed as an offer. A cage made of protection and necessity. Vincent cleared his throat. "Boss, we should move. If they know about this location, they might try again tonight." Samuel nodded, then extended his hand to me. "What do you say, Sarah Mitchell? Do we have a deal?" I looked at his outstretched hand, at the choice that wasn't really a choice at all. Outside, Brooklyn continued its oblivious routine. Inside, my carefully constructed new life was collapsing into the violence I'd tried so desperately to escape. I shook his hand, his grip firm and certain. Deal. His smile widened. Excellent. Vincent, take Miss Mitchell to the car. We're going home. Then turning back to me, his voice softened just slightly. Don't worry. I take care of what's mine. And as of tonight, you're under my protection. The possessiveness in his tone should have terrified me. Instead, all I felt was the cold certainty that I'd just traded one form of captivity for another. The drive to Samuel's estate took 40 minutes, winding through Brooklyn into areas where streetlights became sparse and properties expanded behind iron gates and stone walls. I sat in the back of a black Mercedes SUV with bulletproof glass and reinforced panels, Vincent driving while another security team member I didn't know rode shotgun. Samuel followed in a separate vehicle, standard protocol for high-value targets, never putting all assets in one car. My hands rested in my lap, steady despite the adrenaline still coursing through my system. The server's vest had been replaced with a leather jacket someone produced from the trunk, covering the bloodstains on my white shirt. Through the tinted windows, I watched the city transform from urban density to suburban sprawl to something approaching rural isolation. We should discuss protocols, Vincent said, without taking his eyes off the road. His voice carried the clipped efficiency of someone accustomed to operational planning. You'll have a room in the main house, 3rd floor east wing. Security monitors the perimeter 24/7. No one enters or leaves without clearance. I'm not a prisoner, I said, testing the boundaries of this arrangement. His eyes found mine in the rearview mirror. No, you're an asset. There's a difference, but from a security standpoint, the restrictions are similar. His tone wasn't unkind, just practical. Until we identify the threat, everyone associated with Mr. Rossi is a potential target. That includes you now. The gates appeared suddenly, 12 feet of wrought iron, topped with security cameras disguised as decorative finials. They swung open smoothly as we approached, closing behind us with a finality that made my chest tighten. The driveway curved through manicured grounds, mature trees creating shadows in the landscape lighting. The house itself rose ahead like something from another era, Italian Renaissance revival, all stone and arched windows, easily 10,000 square feet. Old money, or at least the appearance of it. Samuel Rossi's family had been in Brooklyn for 4 generations, building their empire through violence and strategic marriages, laundering criminal proceeds through legitimate businesses until the line between legal and illegal blurred beyond recognition. The agency briefing had been thorough on that point. The Rossi organization controlled construction unions, waste management, and a dozen restaurants across 3 states. Prosecuting them required evidence that witnesses rarely survived to provide. The Mercedes stopped beneath a covered portico. Vincent opened my door, gesturing for me to follow him inside. The foyer was all marble floors and crystal chandeliers, a grand staircase sweeping upward to the 2nd floor. Paintings lined the walls. Originals, I noted, recognizing a Caravaggio that should have been in a museum. The air smelled of furniture polish and old wood, the scent of wealth maintained across decades. A woman appeared from a side hallway, late 50s, gray hair pulled into a severe bun. She wore a housekeeper's uniform, black dress and practical shoes, but carried herself with the authority of someone who'd been managing this household for years. Her eyes swept over me with practiced assessment, taking in the blood-stained shirt visible beneath the borrowed jacket, my disheveled appearance, the tension in my posture. "This is Mrs. Castellano," Vincent said. "She manages the household staff. You'll coordinate with her for anything you need." Mrs. Castellano's expression remained neutral. "You're the new security consultant?" "Sarah Mitchell," I offered, not extending my hand since hers remained folded at her waist. "The room is prepared," she said to Vincent, then to me. "Follow me, please." We climbed the grand staircase, our footsteps muted by Persian runners. The 2nd floor branched into 2 wings, but Mrs. Castellano led me up a narrower staircase to the 3rd level. The hallway here was less ornate, more functional. Staff quarters, I realized. Or at least rooms designated for people who weren't family. She opened a door halfway down the hall, gesturing me inside. The room was larger than my entire apartment in Brooklyn. A 4-poster bed dominated one wall, dressed in cream linens that probably cost more than I made in a month. Heavy curtains covered windows that overlooked the grounds. An ensuite bathroom was visible through an open door, all marble and brass fixtures. Meals are served at 7, noon, and 6, Mrs. Castellano said, her tone businesslike. If you require something outside those times, the kitchen is available. Mr. Rossi asks that you join him for breakfast tomorrow at 8 in the conservatory. Do you have questions? My things, I started. My apartment will be handled, she interrupted smoothly. Vincent's team will retrieve your belongings tomorrow. For tonight, you'll find appropriate clothing in the closet. Toiletries are in the bathroom. She moved toward the door, then paused. The 3rd floor is residential, staff and guests only. Mr. Rossi's private quarters are on the 2nd floor, east wing. You don't go there unless summoned. Understood? The warning was clear. I nodded. Understood. She left, closing the door behind her with a soft click. I stood in the center of the room, suddenly aware of how exhausted I was. The adrenaline crash was coming, my hands starting to shake now that I was alone. I'd killed people before. 3 men in Yemen, 2 in Istanbul before everything went wrong. But that had been in the field, with backup and extraction plans, and the weight of national security justifying every trigger pull. Tonight had been different. Instinct and training overriding 6 months of careful invisibility, exposing everything I'd worked to hide. And now I was trapped in a mobster's mansion, committed to an arrangement that felt increasingly like a mistake. The bathroom was stocked with luxury products, brands I recognized from department stores I could never afford. I showered until the water ran cold, scrubbing away the blood and the scent of violence, watching pink-tinged water circle the drain. The clothes Mrs. Castellano mentioned were in the closet as promised. Casual pants and shirts in my size, underwear still in packages, even pajamas in soft cotton. Someone had taken my measurements. Someone had prepared for my arrival before tonight's attack ever happened. That realization settled over me like ice water. Samuel Rossi had been watching me longer than I'd realized. Long enough to prepare a room, stock it with my sizes, arrange for my integration into his household. The attack tonight hadn't created this situation. It had simply accelerated plans already in motion. I dressed in the pajamas mechanically, my mind racing through implications. If Rossi had been surveilling me for weeks or months, what else did he know? Had he identified me from the old surveillance operation? Did he know about Istanbul? About David Chen? About why I'd disappeared from the agency? Sleep seemed impossible, but exhaustion won eventually. I lay in the too-soft bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the house settling around me. Somewhere below, Vincent's security team was monitoring cameras and running background checks and trying to identify who'd sent 3 assassins to a Brooklyn restaurant. And somewhere in this mansion, Samuel Rossi was making plans that involved me in ways I didn't yet understand. Morning arrived with sunlight streaming through gaps in the curtains. My internal clock said 6:15, early, but years of military discipline had trained my body to wake before dawn. I dressed in the provided clothes, dark pants and a simple gray sweater, and ventured into the hallway. The house was already awake. I could hear voices from lower floors, smell coffee brewing somewhere distant. Following the scent and my sense of direction, I found the kitchen, a massive space with professional-grade appliances and granite countertops. 2 women in staff uniforms were preparing breakfast, working with the efficiency of practiced routine. They looked up as I entered, surprise flickering across their faces. One was young, maybe early 20s, with dark hair pulled into a ponytail. The other was older, probably Mrs. Castellano's age, with knowing eyes that assessed me quickly. "You're the new consultant," the older woman said. Not quite a question. Sarah Mitchell. I kept my voice neutral, aware I was navigating unfamiliar social territory. Is there coffee? The younger woman poured a cup without being asked, sliding it across the counter. Cream and sugar? Black. I accepted the mug, warmth seeping into my hands. Thank you. The older woman returned to chopping vegetables, her knife work precise and practiced. Mr. Rossi likes his breakfast at 8 exactly. You're meeting him in the conservatory. Maria will show you the way when it's time. The younger woman, Maria, nodded, offering a tentative smile. It's through the south wing. I'll take you. I spent the next hour exploring the accessible areas of the house, mapping layouts and exits with the instincts I couldn't suppress. The ground floor contained formal living spaces, a library with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, a dining room that could seat 20. Security cameras were visible at strategic points, but I identified at least 3 hidden ones based on sight lines and protective protocols. The conservatory occupied the back of the house, a glass-enclosed room filled with plants and morning light. Samuel was already there, dressed casually in dark slacks and a white shirt open at the collar. He stood by the windows looking out at the grounds, a coffee cup in hand, and turned as I entered. Good morning, he said, his tone pleasant, almost warm. I hope you slept well. Well enough. I moved into the room cautiously, noting the breakfast setup, a small table with 2 place settings, covered dishes keeping food warm. This wasn't a business meeting. This was designed to feel intimate, personal. Please, sit. He gestured to the chair opposite his. We have things to discuss, but we should eat first. Mrs. Castellano prepared your preferences. Eggs, toast, fruit. If there's something else you'd like, I can have it brought. I sat, unnerved by his knowledge of my breakfast habits. You've been watching me for a while. I've been aware of you, he corrected, taking his own seat. There's a difference. His dark eyes met mine steadily. When someone with your particular skill set appears in one of my regular establishments, exhibiting behaviors consistent with intelligence training while pretending to be an ordinary server, that attracts attention. So you knew what I was before last night. I suspected. He lifted the covers from the dishes, revealing exactly what he'd promised. Last night confirmed it. The way you moved, the precision of your responses, the lack of hesitation. That's not something people fake. His voice softened slightly. I recognize it because I was trained similarly once. Military intelligence, long before I took over the family business. That was new information, not included in the agency briefing. I filed it away, adding depth to my understanding of the man across from me. Why tell me that? Because I want you to understand we're not so different, you and I. He served himself eggs and toast with casual ease. We both learned to navigate dangerous worlds. We both made choices that led us to this moment. And we both have enemies who'd prefer us dead. I ate mechanically, my appetite minimal but recognizing the need for fuel. The food was excellent. Eggs perfectly cooked, bread freshly baked, fruit cut with careful precision. Someone in this household took pride in their work. Tell me about Istanbul, Samuel said suddenly, his tone conversational, but his eyes sharp. My fork paused halfway to my mouth. What makes you think I was in Istanbul? Because I have contacts in circles that occasionally overlap with intelligence communities. His smile was knowing. And because when I ran your face through certain databases that theoretically don't exist, your file was flagged with operational restrictions that only apply to personnel involved in classified incidents requiring significant damage control. My appetite vanished completely. If you know about Istanbul, then you know I'm not someone you want involved in your business. I failed that mission. Got my partner killed. That's why I disappeared. I wasn't reliable anymore. Samuel leaned back in his chair, studying me with an intensity that made my skin prickle. I know what the official report says. Operation compromised due to judgment error resulting in 1 fatality and asset loss. Field Officer Sarah Mitchell, deemed psychologically unsuitable for continued service. He paused. I also know those reports often obscure more than they reveal. There's nothing obscure about it. My voice came out harder than intended. I made a bad call. David Chen died because I prioritized mission objectives over team safety. The agency was right to push me out. Were they? His question hung in the air, deceptively simple. Or did you become a convenient scapegoat for an operation that was compromised from the beginning? I set down my fork, my hands clenching into fists beneath the table. What are you talking about? Istanbul was a trap, Sarah. Samuel's voice dropped lower, almost gentle. The intelligence that sent you there was fabricated. The asset you were meeting never existed. Someone in your own agency set you up to fail, and when your partner died as a result, they blamed you to cover their own involvement. That's impossible. My mind raced, trying to reconcile his words with everything I knew. The mission briefing had been solid. The asset had provided verifiable intelligence for months. Unless someone with high-level access manipulated every piece of information you received. He watched my expression carefully. I have evidence, if you're willing to look at it. Documents my people acquired from sources who specialize in selling secrets intelligence agencies would prefer remain buried. Why would you investigate that? Why would you care what happened to me in Istanbul? Because whoever set you up has connections to the people trying to kill me now. His words landed like physical blows. The same organization that compromised your operation has been feeding information to my enemies. They want me dead, and they wanted you discredited and isolated. His jaw tightened. We're both targets of the same conspiracy, Sarah. And the only way either of us survives is if we work together to expose it. The conservatory felt too small suddenly, the glass walls closing in. Everything I'd believed about Istanbul, about my failure, about why I'd destroyed my own career, all of it potentially built on lies. I need to see this evidence, I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. Samuel nodded, rising from his chair. Come with me. There's a lot you need to understand. He led me through the house to a section I hadn't explored, a private office behind a door that required a security code and fingerprint scan. Inside was a space that looked more like a tactical operations center than a mobster's study. Multiple monitors showed security feeds from around the property. File cabinets lined one wall. A large desk held computers and communications equipment that was decidedly not civilian grade. Vincent was already there, along with two other men I hadn't met. They looked up as we entered, their expressions carefully neutral. Gentlemen, Samuel said, his tone shifting to pure business, let's show Miss Mitchell what we've discovered. For the next 2 hours, they walked me through a conspiracy that made my stomach turn. Documents showed payments from a shell corporation to agency personnel. Communications intercepted between my former supervisors and an organization Vincent identified as a mercenary group with ties to several hostile foreign governments. Photographs of meetings that should never have occurred. And in the center of it all, a name I recognized. Stephen Marsh, Samuel's accountant and financial advisor, a man who'd been with the Rossi organization for 15 years, trusted with access to every account and business operation. A man who, according to the evidence spread across Samuel's desk, had been selling information to competitors and intelligence services, while systematically positioning himself to take over the entire organization. Stephen arranged the Istanbul operation, Samuel explained, pointing to a financial transfer dated 2 weeks before my mission. He paid your supervisors to send you into a trap. When your partner died, it created the chaos he needed. An operative burned out and desperate. Someone he could potentially recruit or eliminate depending on how things played out. Why me specifically? My voice sounded distant to my own ears. Because you were good at your job. Too good. He tapped another document. Stephen was planning something big. He needed talented operatives discredited and available, people with skills, but no institutional support. He's been collecting assets for months, building a private army to make his move against me. "And the attack last night?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Steven's opening move." Vincent's voice was hard. "He knew you'd be at the restaurant. He knew the boss would be there. He sent professionals to eliminate both of you, probably planning to position himself as the grieving successor who'd step in to stabilize the organization." The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. I wasn't just caught in a mob power struggle. I was part of a larger operation that had destroyed my career, killed my partner, and led me directly into Samuel Rossi's orbit. "What happens now?" I asked, looking at Samuel directly. "Now we end this." His voice carried absolute certainty. "Steven doesn't know we've identified him yet. He thinks last night was just a failed attempt, that we're still investigating blind. That gives us an advantage." He turned to face me fully. "But I need your help. I need someone who understands intelligence work, who can think like an operative, who can help me dismantle Steven's network before he makes another attempt." It was the moment of choice. I could refuse, try to disappear again, spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder. Or I could do what I'd been trained to do: identify the threat, neutralize it, and maybe find some measure of redemption in the process. "What do you need me to do?" I asked. Samuel's smile was sharp and dangerous. "I need you to be exactly what you are. An operative. My operative. Together, we're going to destroy everyone who's trying to destroy us." The conservatory breakfast seemed like hours ago, though barely half a day had passed. I was no longer Sarah Mitchell the server, hiding from her past. I was Sarah Mitchell the operative again, with a target and a mission and reasons to use skills I'd tried to bury. And standing across from me was Samuel Rossi. Criminal. Target. And now something like an ally in a war neither of us had chosen, but both intended to win. The next 72 hours dissolved into a rhythm I recognized from my agency days. Operational planning, intelligence gathering, threat assessment. Samuel's office became my workspace, the monitors displaying security feeds and financial records replacing the classified terminals I'd once used in Langley. Vincent coordinated with his team while I analyzed patterns, identifying vulnerabilities in Stephen Marsh's network that a conventional security approach would miss. Stephen himself remained visible, maintaining his role as trusted advisor. He arrived at the estate each morning at 9, carrying his leather briefcase and tablet, discussing quarterly earnings and investment strategies with Samuel, as though nothing had changed. I watched him through security cameras, studying body language and micro-expressions, cataloging the small tells that revealed stress beneath his professional veneer. "He's good," I admitted to Samuel during one of our evening briefings. "Most people wouldn't notice he's operating under pressure. But see how he touches his wedding ring when discussing the restaurant finances? That's a self-soothing gesture. He's anxious about something specific to that part of the business." Samuel leaned forward, his attention focused on the monitor showing Stephen in the library below. "The restaurants are where he's been laundering money for his outside contacts." Vincent discovered discrepancies in the supplier payments, small amounts, easily overlooked, but consistent over 18 months. "How much has he stolen?" I asked, already running calculations in my head. "Approximately $3 million. Samuel's voice was cold, enough to fund a small army of mercenaries, which is exactly what he's been doing. The evidence Vincent's team had compiled was damning. Stephen had recruited 6 former Special Forces operatives, providing them with equipment, intelligence, and targets. The 3 men who'd attacked the restaurant were just the opening move. According to intercepted communications, Stephen was planning something larger, a coordinated strike during a family gathering scheduled for the following weekend. "He's getting desperate," I said, studying the tactical breakdown Vincent had prepared. "This kind of operation has too many variables, too many things that could go wrong. He's rushing because he knows time is running out. Or because he knows we're getting close," Samuel countered. His dark eyes met mine. "Stephen is intelligent. He's been with my organization long enough to understand how we operate," If he suspects we've identified him, he might accelerate his timeline. Then we need to move first. I pulled up a map of the estate on one of the monitors. Your security is good, but it's designed to repel external threats. Stephen has internal access. He knows codes, protocols, response times. If he decides to make his move here instead of waiting for the family gathering, we're vulnerable. What do you suggest? Samuel asked. And I noticed how naturally he'd shifted to treating me as an equal partner in strategic planning, rather than just a consultant. I spent the next hour outlining a modified security protocol, identifying choke points where Stephen's access could be controlled without alerting him to our awareness. Vincent listened carefully, occasionally interjecting with practical considerations about his team's capabilities. By the time we finished, we had a plan that would either expose Stephen's network completely or trigger the confrontation we were trying to avoid. The following morning, I implemented the first phase. Mrs. Castellano, who I'd learned had been with the Rossi family for 30 years and wielded considerable authority in household matters, proved invaluable. She adjusted staff schedules, creating gaps in coverage that would force Stephen to reveal alternative resources if he had people embedded in the household. "You think someone on my staff is working for him?" she asked, her voice tight with controlled anger when I explained the rationale. "I think Stephen is thorough," I replied carefully. "Anyone with extended access to this house represents a potential asset or vulnerability. We need to identify which is which." She nodded, her jaw set. "Tell me what you need." By that evening, 3 staff members had exhibited suspicious behavior, making calls during their breaks to numbers that traced back to burner phones, accessing areas of the house outside their normal duties, asking questions about Samuel's schedule that went beyond simple curiosity. Vincent's team was following up, mapping their connections, building a comprehensive picture of Stephen's network. I was reviewing surveillance footage in Samuel's office when he entered, carrying 2 glasses and a bottle of scotch I recognized as absurdly expensive. "Drink?" he offered, echoing that first night in the restaurant. This time I accepted, watching as he poured generous measures. The silence between us felt different than it had initially. Less adversarial, more collaborative. He'd proven himself to be exactly what he'd claimed, a man with military intelligence training who understood operational thinking and valued competence over ego. "You're good at this," he said finally, settling into the chair beside mine rather than behind his desk. "The way you think, the patterns you identify, it's impressive." His voice carried genuine respect. "The agency was foolish to push you out." "The agency made the right call," I replied, the familiar guilt settling over me like a weight. David Chen died because I prioritized the mission over my partner's safety. That's not debatable. Samuel was quiet for a moment, studying his glass. "I lost someone once. My younger brother, Marcus. He was 23, fresh from the army, eager to prove himself in the family business." His voice roughened slightly. "I sent him to negotiate a deal with a rival crew. Told him it was routine, nothing dangerous. They killed him to send me a message." "I'm sorry," I said, meaning it. "For years I blamed myself. Should have sent more security, should have known they couldn't be trusted, should have gone myself." He looked at me directly, but eventually I realized that guilt was a luxury I couldn't afford. Marcus made choices. I made choices. The people who killed him made choices. All of it together created that moment. He paused. "Your partner made choices too. So did whoever compromised your operation. You carrying all that blame alone doesn't honor his memory. It just makes you less effective at preventing future deaths." The words settled into spaces I'd kept carefully protected, challenging assumptions I'd built my self-condemnation around. "It's not that simple." "No, it's not." His slight smile was sad, knowing. "But it's also not as complicated as we make it. We do the best we can with the information we have. Sometimes that's enough. Sometimes it isn't. All we can do is keep moving forward." A chime from one of the monitors interrupted the moment. Vincent's face appeared on screen, his expression urgent. "Boss, we have movement. 3 vehicles approaching from the south access road. No headlights. Military formation. How far out?" Samuel was on his feet instantly, the contemplative man vanishing behind operational command. 4 minutes, maybe less. Vincent's voice was crisp. "I'm initiating lockdown protocol." Samuel turned to me. "This is it. Stephen's making his move." The next 4 minutes were controlled chaos. Vincent's security team mobilized with practiced efficiency, establishing defensive positions throughout the house. Mrs. Castellano evacuated non-essential staff to the reinforced safe room in the basement. Samuel armed himself with a pistol from his desk safe, checking the magazine with movements that spoke of long familiarity. I accepted the weapon Vincent offered me, a Glock 19, standard issue and reliable. The weight felt simultaneously foreign and familiar in my hand. 6 months of deliberate distance from violence evaporating in seconds. "Rules of engagement?" I asked Vincent, falling into the professional detachment that made operational work possible. "Anyone coming through that perimeter unauthorized is hostile," he replied. "We protect the house and Mr. Rossi. Everything else is secondary." The vehicles stopped at the estate's outer wall, just beyond camera range. Thermal imaging showed approximately 12 figures dispersing into tactical positions. Professional formation, coordinated movement patterns, exactly what we'd expected based on Stephen's recruitment profile. "They're testing our response," I said, watching the monitors, looking for weak points in the security setup. Samuel stood beside me, his presence calm despite the threat materializing around us. "How long before they breach?" "Depends on their equipment and training." I studied the thermal signatures, analyzing their approach vectors. If they're former special forces like we suspect, maybe 10 minutes before they attempt entry. They'll probe first, identify our defensive positions, then concentrate force on the weakest point. The house phone rang, the landline that connected to the front gate. Samuel picked it up, putting it on speaker. "Yes? Mr. Rossi." Stephen's voice came through, pleasant and professional as always. "I'm afraid we have a situation that requires your immediate attention. There are men on your property, and I believe they mean you harm. I'm in the South Gatehouse with your security team. We need to coordinate a response." It was a masterful performance. Stephen positioning himself as the concerned advisor, establishing an alibi while his mercenaries prepared their assault. Samuel's eyes met mine, and I saw cold rage there, carefully controlled. "Thank you for the warning, Stephen," Samuel said, his tone matching the other man's false concern. "Vincent is handling security protocol. Please remain where you are until the situation is resolved." "Of course. But Mr. Rossi, I really think we should discuss our defensive options. Perhaps if you came to the gatehouse where we have better communications equipment." "I'm quite comfortable managing from here," Samuel interrupted smoothly. "Vincent will keep you updated." He disconnected without waiting for a response. "He's trying to separate you from your primary security," I said. "Get you to a secondary location where his people have better access." Vincent's voice crackled through the security system. "Boss, the South Gatehouse team isn't responding to radio calls. I think Stephen's already neutralized them." "Casualties?" Samuel's voice was hard. "Unknown. But we have to assume the gatehouse is compromised." The tactical situation was deteriorating rapidly. Stephen controlled one entry point and had forces positioned around the perimeter. We were defending a large structure with limited personnel against attackers who'd had time to study our routines and identify vulnerabilities. "We need to change the equation," I said, "an operational plan forming. They expect us to defend statically, holding position inside the house. What if we don't?" Samuel turned to me, understanding dawning. "You want to go offensive. I want to eliminate their advantage." I pulled up the estate map, highlighting the positions where thermal imaging showed concentrations of hostile forces. "Vincent's team holds the house. You and I take 2 of his best people and hit their staging area here, where they're coordinating the assault. Take out their command structure, and the rest falls apart. It was risky, exactly the kind of aggressive tactic that had gotten David Chen killed in Istanbul. But this was different. I was different. 6 months of running, of hiding, of pretending to be someone I wasn't, had given me perspective. I understood now what Samuel had meant about choices and consequences. Fear of failure couldn't be allowed to prevent action when lives were at stake. "Vincent," Samuel said into the security system, "send Marcus and Tony to the office. We're going hunting." "Boss, that's not protocol," Vincent protested. "You should stay in the secure location while we handle—" "The protocol is whatever keeps me alive and my people safe." Samuel cut him off. "Sarah's right. We can't win this defensively." His voice softened slightly. "Trust me, Vincent. I know what I'm doing." A pause, then Vincent's reluctant agreement. 2 minutes. Samuel opened a concealed panel in the office wall, revealing an armory that would have impressed most military units. He selected weapons with practiced efficiency: a tactical shotgun for himself, an AR-15-style rifle that he offered to me. Body armor came next: ceramic plates and tactical vests that added weight, but crucial protection. "You've done this before," I observed, watching how naturally he prepared for combat. "More times than I'd like to admit." He checked his shotgun's action. The movement's automatic. "This life requires occasional violence. I've learned to be good at it because the alternative is being dead." Marcus and Tony arrived, both former military, both carrying themselves with the alert readiness of men who'd seen real combat. Samuel briefed them quickly, outlining our plan to flank the attacker's position and eliminate their command element. "Rules are simple," he told them. "Fast, aggressive, no hesitation. These men came here to kill me and everyone in this house. We respond accordingly." We moved through the house using service corridors and passages I'd mapped during my initial reconnaissance. The architectural layout that had seemed excessive for a private residence now revealed its true purpose: defensive depth, multiple routes for evacuation or counterattack, strategic advantages built into the structure itself. The night air was cold when we exited through a concealed door in the estate's north wall. Stars glittered overhead, indifferent to the violence about to unfold below them. We moved in tactical formation, weapons ready, using shadows and landscaping for concealment. The attackers had positioned their command post in a cluster of trees 300 yards from the main house. Good visibility of the target, concealment from casual observation. Close enough to coordinate but far enough to avoid immediate danger. Standard military doctrine, which meant they'd be following other standard procedures as well. I signaled for the team to hold position, studying the thermal signatures through the scope on my rifle. 3 figures clustered around what looked like communications equipment. 2 more positioned as security, facing toward the house rather than watching their backs. "Overconfident," I whispered to Samuel. "They think we're pinned down inside." His smile was predatory. "Let's teach them otherwise." We split into 2 elements, Marcus and Tony circling wide to approach from the east, Samuel and I advancing directly from the north. The security perimeter was exactly where I'd anticipated, positioned to watch for threats from the house rather than the surrounding grounds. We were within 50 yards before anyone noticed. The first guard's warning shout died as Samuel's shotgun roared, the sound shockingly loud in the quiet night. I engaged the second guard, 2 controlled shots center mass that dropped him before he could bring his weapon up. Then we were moving forward, closing the distance before the command element could react. It was over in seconds. Professional violence delivered with precision and overwhelming force. The communications equipment was destroyed, the operators down, the tactical advantage suddenly and dramatically shifted. "All positions," Samuel said into his radio, "command element neutralized. Remaining hostiles are disorganized. Press the attack." The sound of gunfire from the house told us Vincent's team was following through, engaging the attackers who'd been preparing their assault. Without coordination, without leadership, Professional soldiers became isolated combatants fighting a defensive action they hadn't prepared for. We made our way back to the house, weapons ready, watching for threats. But the remaining attackers were already retreating, falling back to their vehicles and disappearing into the night. They'd lost their advantage, taken casualties, and accomplished nothing beyond confirming that Samuel Rossi was far more dangerous than they'd anticipated. Inside, Vincent was coordinating cleanup with the methodical efficiency of someone who'd done this before. 2 of his team had minor injuries, nothing serious. The attackers had left behind 4 bodies, including the 2 guards Samuel and I had killed. Mrs. Castellano was already on the phone with contacts who specialized in making inconvenient corpses disappear. "The Southgate house," Vincent reported, approaching Samuel. 3 of our people dead. Stephen shot them himself before the assault began. Samuel's expression went cold and still. "Where is he now?" "Gone. Probably realized things went wrong and ran." Vincent's jaw tightened. "But he can't get far. I've got people watching his house, his office, every place he might go." I thought about Stephen Marsh, respected financial advisor and secret traitor, watching his carefully planned assault collapse into disaster. He'd revealed himself too early, committed his resources to an attack that failed, and now faced the very real probability of Samuel Rossi's revenge. "He'll go to ground," I said. "Somewhere he's prepared in advance. A safe house with cash and documents, transportation out of the country. He's too smart not to have an exit strategy." Samuel nodded slowly. "Then we need to find him before he uses it." He turned to me, and I saw something new in his expression. Not just respect or professional appreciation, but something deeper. Personal. "You saved my life tonight, Sarah. Again. That's twice now." "Just doing the job," I replied, uncomfortable with the intensity of his gaze. "No." His voice was soft but certain. "This was more than professional competence. You could have stayed hidden in the house, let my security team handle the threat. Instead, you put yourself in danger, trusted your skills, and made the difference between victory and catastrophe." He paused. "That kind of commitment, that kind of courage, it means something." The office felt too small suddenly, the space between us charged with something I didn't want to examine too closely. Samuel Rossi was a criminal, a man who'd built an empire on violence and intimidation. But he was also intelligent, honorable in his own way, and had shown me more respect in 4 days than the agency had in my entire career. "We should focus on finding Stephen," I said, deflecting, "before he has time to regroup or reach out to whatever other resources he has available." Samuel smiled slightly, acknowledging the deflection without calling it out. "Of course. Business first. But Sarah?" His hand touched my shoulder briefly, the contact warm even through the tactical vest. "When this is over, when Stephen is dealt with and the immediate threat is neutralized, we need to talk. About what happens next, about what this arrangement between us becomes." I nodded, unable to form words around the complicated mix of emotions his statement generated. Because I knew what he was suggesting, what the possessive tone in his voice meant. Samuel Rossi didn't just want my skills. He wanted me, my loyalty, my presence, perhaps more. And the most dangerous part was that I wasn't entirely opposed to the idea. The dawn light filtering through Samuel's office windows found us still working. Surveillance footage and financial records spread across multiple monitors in a pattern that would have made sense only to someone trained in intelligence analysis. Coffee had gone cold in forgotten cups. Vincent had departed an hour ago to coordinate the search for Stephen, leaving Samuel and me alone in the kind of productive silence that comes from shared purpose. I'd found the pattern buried in 18 months of transaction records, small transfers to accounts in the Cayman Islands, routed through shell corporations that existed only on paper. The amounts were insignificant individually, never enough to trigger automatic fraud detection. but aggregated across dozens of accounts. They represented a sophisticated money laundering operation that had been funding Stephen's network, while simultaneously bleeding Samuel's organization of resources. "He's been planning this for at least 2 years," I said, highlighting the earliest transaction I could trace. Long before I entered the picture. Whatever triggered his decision to move now, it wasn't just about opportunity. Something changed that made him feel like waiting was more dangerous than acting. Samuel leaned forward, studying the financial data with the focused intensity I'd come to recognize. His legitimate businesses were doing well during this period. Restaurants expanding, construction contracts increasing, no obvious financial pressure. His finger traced a line connecting several accounts. But here, these transfers correspond with dates when I was meeting with the Colombo family about territory arrangements. Your expansion was threatening someone, I realized. Stephen was passing information to your competitors, trying to orchestrate conflicts that would weaken your position. When that didn't work, he decided on more direct action. The phone on Samuel's desk rang, his private line, the number known only to essential personnel. He answered with a curt greeting, then his expression shifted to something harder. "When?" A pause. "No, don't move on him yet. I want eyes only until I arrive." His gaze found mine. "Send me the location." He disconnected and was already moving toward the armory, his exhaustion vanishing behind operational focus. Stephen's son, Michael. Vincent's team found him at a motel in Queens, strung out and incoherent. Apparently he's been there for 3 days. Stephen has a son? That hadn't appeared in any of the background information I'd reviewed. Michael Marsh, 26 years old. Samuel pulled out a tactical vest, checking the plates with practiced efficiency. Heroin addiction, multiple rehab stays, estranged from his father for the past year. Stephen told everyone he'd cut him off financially after the last overdose. His voice carried disgust, though I couldn't tell if it was directed at Stephen or the situation itself. But according to Vincent, Michael has fresh track marks and several $1,000s cash in his motel room. "You think Stephen was using him?" I said, the implications forming. Keeping his son dependent and desperate. Someone who could be controlled through addiction and manipulated into actions he wouldn't otherwise take. Samuel nodded grimly. And if Michael was involved in any of Stephen's operations, he might know where his father would run. He looked at me directly. "I need you with me for this. Michael will be scared, defensive. Having someone who isn't obviously threatening might help him talk." I should have objected. Should have recognized that I was being drawn deeper into Samuel's world, that each step forward made the possibility of walking away more remote. But the operational puzzle had engaged my training, and some part of me that I'd tried to suppress for 6 months was alive again, finding purpose in the hunt. The drive to Queens took 40 minutes through morning traffic. Vincent met us outside the motel, a rundown establishment that rented rooms by the hour and asked no questions, the kind of place where people went to disappear, at least temporarily. "Room 12, Vincent said, gesturing toward the second floor. "2 of my guys are watching the exits. He's alone, mostly unconscious. We haven't approached yet." "Good," Samuel said. "Sarah and I will handle the initial contact. Keep your team back unless I signal otherwise." The motel room was exactly what I'd expected. Stained carpet, furniture that had seen decades of hard use, the pervasive smell of cigarettes and chemical cleaning products failing to mask less pleasant odors. Michael Marsh lay on the bed, barely conscious, his arm showing the telltale marks of recent injection sites. He was thin to the point of emaciation, his face carrying the hollowed-out look of long-term addiction. But underneath the damage, I could see traces of his father. The same bone structure, similar coloring. He'd probably been handsome once, before heroin had carved away everything except need. "Michael," Samuel said, his voice surprisingly gentle. "I'm Samuel Rossi. I work with your father. We need to talk about where he is." Michael's eyes struggled to focus, pupils contracted to pinpoints. "Don't know," he mumbled. Haven't seen him. Don't care. I moved closer, sitting on the edge of the bed in what I hoped was a non-threatening posture. Michael, my name is Sarah. I'm not here to hurt you, but your father is in serious trouble, and people are looking for him. If you know where he might go, telling us could help keep him safe. It was a lie, of course. Samuel's intention wasn't to keep Stephen safe, but to ensure he faced consequences for his betrayal. But Michael didn't need to know that, and appealing to whatever residual filial loyalty remained seemed like the most effective approach. He told me to stay here, Michael said after a long pause, his words slurring together. Said he'd come get me when it was safe. Gave me money, stuff to keep me quiet. His hand gestured vaguely toward the nightstand. Said we'd go away together, start over somewhere new. When did he tell you this? I asked gently. Yesterday morning. Came by early, real nervous. Never seen him like that before. He looked at me directly for the first time, and I saw confusion mixing with the chemical fog. Said he was sorry, that he'd made mistakes, but was going to fix everything. That I'd understand someday why he did what he did. Samuel moved to the nightstand, opening the drawer. Inside was a prepaid cell phone, several $1,000s in cash, and a small quantity of heroin in plastic bags. He powered on the phone, checking the call log. One outgoing call, made at 6 this morning, to a New York number. He showed me the screen, and I recognized the area code. Long Island, probably somewhere on the North Shore where property was expensive and privacy easily purchased. I pulled out my own phone, running the number through reverse lookup databases I'd maintained access to through carefully cultivated back channels. The phone is registered to a property management company, I said after a moment, but the actual property owner is listed as M. Castellano. I looked at Samuel. That's your mother's name. Samuel's expression went very still. My mother died 8 years ago. Her estate was supposed to be liquidated, the proceeds distributed to family members. His jaw tightened. Stephen handled the estate settlement, so he kept at least one property off the books, I concluded. Probably transferred it to a shell entity that looked legitimate on paper, but gave him a secret asset no one knew about. We need to move on this now, Samuel said, already heading for the door. Vincent's voice came through the radio before we reached the stairs. Boss, we have a problem. Local police just got a call about suspicious activity at this motel. They're 2 minutes out. The timing was too perfect to be coincidence. Someone had been watching, waiting to see if anyone came looking for Michael, ready to complicate the situation with law enforcement involvement. Stephen was still thinking tactically, using his son as bait while preparing obstacles for anyone who tried to follow the trail. Leave through the back, I told Samuel. I'll handle the police response and meet you at the North Shore location. He grabbed my arm, his grip firm. No separation. We stay together. His eyes met mine with intensity that had nothing to do with operational security. I'm not losing anyone else today. The possessiveness should have annoyed me. Instead, it triggered something uncomfortably close to warmth. Vincent's already moving the team to the vehicles, I said. If we move fast, we can be out before the police establish a perimeter. We made it to the parking lot as the first patrol car pulled into the motel entrance. Vincent's team had positioned their vehicles strategically, creating a casual scene of morning activity that wouldn't draw immediate attention. We walked rather than ran, acting like ordinary people going about ordinary business, and were on the highway before the officers even entered the building. The North Shore property was in a gated community called Harbor Heights, expensive homes on large lots with private beach access, and the kind of security that valued discretion over visibility. Getting past the main gate required credentials we didn't have, but Vincent's team had come prepared with tools that made locks and electronic security merely temporary obstacles. The house Stephen had hidden sat at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac, a modern colonial with pristine landscaping and windows that reflected morning light without revealing what lay inside. No vehicles in the driveway, No obvious signs of occupation. But thermal imaging from Vincent's equipment showed at least one heat signature inside. Second floor, stationary. Could be Stephen, Vincent said quietly. Or could be security he's hired. We need to assume hostile presence. Samuel checked his weapon, his movements automatic. Standard entry protocol. Vincent, take your team through the back. Sarah and I will approach from the front. 30-second delay, then simultaneous breach. I should have objected to being included in the tactical entry. Should have stayed back and provided overwatch, the sensible role for someone who'd been out of operational work for 6 months. But Samuel's assumption that I'd be by his side felt natural, correct in a way I didn't want to examine. The front door was unlocked, a detail that immediately raised alarms. No one running for their life leaves entry points unsecured. This was either invitation or trap, and distinguishing between the two would require going inside. Samuel moved through the entry hall with the fluid competence of someone who'd done forced entries before, weapon up and tracking, checking corners and sight lines with professional discipline. I followed, covering our rear, hyper-aware of sounds and movement that might indicate ambush. The house was furnished but felt unlived in. No personal items, no clutter. Nothing that suggested anyone actually resided here beyond using it as a temporary shelter. We cleared the first floor efficiently, finding nothing except expensive furniture and careful emptiness. The heat signature was definitely on the second floor now, still stationary. Vincent's voice came through our earpieces. Back entrance clear. Moving to the second floor from the east stairs. We're taking the west stairs, Samuel replied, converging on the signature. The hallway on the second floor was darker, curtains drawn against the morning light. The thermal signature originated from the master bedroom at the end of the hall. Samuel positioned himself beside the door, weapon ready. I took the opposite side, my rifle aimed and finger resting along the trigger guard. On 3, Samuel whispered. 1, 2, 3. He kicked the door open and we flowed inside with weapons tracking, ready for resistance. But there was no ambush, no desperate last stand. Stephen Marsh sat in a chair beside the bedroom window, absolutely still, his expensive suit immaculate, his hands folded in his lap, and a single bullet hole in his temple. Blood and brain matter painting the wall behind him. The room smelled of gunpowder and death, the metallic scent mixing with Stephen's cologne. A pistol lay on the floor beside his chair, a .45 caliber, expensive and well-maintained. On the nightstand sat a sealed envelope with Samuel's name written across it in careful script. Suicide, Vincent said from the doorway, his assessment clinical. Probably within the last 2 hours based on lividity. Samuel moved to the nightstand, picking up the envelope. His face was unreadable as he opened it, extracting several pages of handwritten text. He read in silence, his expression growing harder with each paragraph. He knew it was over, Samuel said finally, his voice flat. Knew we'd identified him, knew his assault had failed, knew there was no escape. His fingers tightened on the pages. This is a confession. Everything. The money laundering, the information sales, the recruited operatives, even Istanbul. He looked at me directly. He admits coordinating with agency personnel to compromise your operation, paying them to send you into a trap so he could have a burned operative available for recruitment if needed. The words should have triggered rage or vindication, or at least some emotional response proportional to learning that my entire career destruction had been orchestrated by the man now dead in front of us. Instead, I felt hollow, emptied of reactions that seemed too small for the enormity of what had been stolen from me. Why? I asked, though I knew motivations rarely made sense when examined closely. Why orchestrate something so elaborate just to have potential assets available? Because he was planning this move against me for years, Samuel said, still reading. And he knew that taking down my organization would require special skills, people with intelligence training, combat experience, operational thinking. He was building a private army, recruiting operators one at a time, compromising them so they'd have no choice except to work for him. It was ambitious in a horrifying way. Stephen had seen the intelligence community as a talent pool, deliberately destroying careers to create desperate, skilled assets he could control. How many others besides me had he targeted? How many operators were out there now, burned and isolated, unknowingly part of a conspiracy that had consumed their lives? "There's more," Samuel said, his voice dropping lower. "About my brother Marcus. Stephen orchestrated his death, set up the meeting with the Colombo crew, passed information that ensured they'd see killing him as necessary." His hand shook slightly. The only external sign of the rage I knew was building inside him. Everything, all the violence, all the loss. It traces back to Stephen positioning himself to take over. Vincent crossed to the window, his professional detachment cracking. 20 years. We trusted him for 20 years, and he was undermining us the entire time. The room felt suffocating, the weight of revelation pressing down like physical force. Stephen's death had denied Samuel the satisfaction of direct revenge, but the confession provided something potentially more valuable, evidence that could be used to dismantle whatever network the man had built, to identify co-conspirators and prevent future attacks. "We need to document everything," I said, falling back on professional protocols because emotions were too complicated to process. The scene, the confession, any computer equipment or records he might have stored here. This evidence could help identify everyone Stephen compromised, including the agency personnel who participated in Istanbul. Samuel nodded slowly, refolding the confession and placing it carefully in his jacket pocket. "Vincent, call our cleaners. This scene needs to be sanitized completely." He turned to me. "Sarah, search the house for anything that might lead to Stephen's other assets or confederates. I want every thread of his operation exposed and cut." The next several hours were methodical and grim. Vincent's team processed the scene with the efficiency of people who'd cleaned up bodies before. I found Stephen's operational records hidden in a false bottom of his bedroom closet, encrypted drives containing financial records, communications logs, and dossiers on operatives he'd recruited or planned to recruit. My file was there among them, photographs from my time at the agency, including some I didn't remember being taken, psychological assessments, mission reports, including the Istanbul operations classified after-action review. Stephen had known everything about me, had studied me like a scientist examining a specimen, identifying weaknesses and pressure points that could be exploited. Samuel found me in Stephen's office, surrounded by printed documents and glowing monitors, my hands shaking as I read through my own history refracted through a traitor's lens. How much of my life was real? I asked, not looking up. How much was manipulation? Stephen influenced my assignment to Istanbul. Maybe he influenced earlier postings too. Maybe he's the reason I was recruited in the first place. Samuel knelt beside my chair, his hand covering mine where it rested on the desk. "You're real, Sarah. Your skills, your choices, your survival, those belong to you, not Stephen." He waited until I met his eyes. Men like Stephen think they control everything, but they don't. They create circumstances, apply pressure, but what we do with that pressure is ours alone. "I killed 3 men tonight," I said quietly. Went back to the violence I'd sworn off. Became an operative again when I'd promised myself I was done. My voice cracked. And the worst part is how easy it was. How natural it felt, because that's who you are. His voice was gentle but firm. Not a killer, a protector. Someone who acts when action is necessary, who uses violence as a tool rather than an identity. He brushed a strand of hair from my face, the gesture unexpectedly tender. "The agency tried to make you something you're not. I'm offering you the chance to be exactly what you are." "And what's that?" I asked, though I already knew what he was suggesting. Mine, the single word carried layers of meaning. Possession, partnership, protection. My security, my advisor, my partner in managing an organization that exists in spaces between law and survival. His thumb traced along my jaw. Someone who understands what I am and chooses to stand beside me anyway. It was the moment I'd been avoiding since that first night in the restaurant. Samuel Rossi was offering not just employment, but integration into his life, his world, his future. Accepting meant abandoning any pretense of returning to normalcy, of someday finding my way back to the legitimate world I'd been trained to protect. But that world had abandoned me first, had used me, broken me, and discarded me when I was no longer convenient. And the man in front of me, criminal and mob boss and orchestrator of violence, had shown me more respect and loyalty in 5 days than the agency had in years. I need time, I said finally, to process everything, to understand what accepting would really mean. Samuel nodded, rising to his feet. Take the time you need. But Sarah? His hand squeezed my shoulder briefly. Don't take too long. The world we live in doesn't wait for perfect clarity. Sometimes you just have to choose a direction and commit to it. He left me alone with Stephen's files, with the evidence of conspiracy that had shaped my life without my knowledge. Outside the window, the Long Island Sound sparkled in afternoon light, indifferent to human complications and moral ambiguities. I had been Sarah Mitchell the operative, then Sarah Mitchell the server, and now I was being offered the chance to become Sarah Mitchell the partner to a man who built empires through force and cunning. None of those identities felt entirely true, but maybe that was the point. Maybe identity wasn't something discovered, but something constructed through choices made in moments like this. The encrypted drives contained enough evidence to destroy careers and uncover networks that had operated in shadows for years. I could turn it over to law enforcement, try to rebuild bridges with the intelligence community, possibly clear my name regarding Istanbul. Or I could give it to Samuel, let him use it to consolidate power and eliminate threats, to build an organization that valued loyalty and competence over bureaucratic convenience. The choice should have been obvious. Should have been clear which path led toward redemption and which toward damnation. But sitting in that Long Island house with Stephen Marsh's body 2 rooms away, and Samuel Rossi's offer still echoing in my mind, I realized the distinction between those paths had become far less clear than I'd once believed. 3 weeks after Stephen Marsh's death, I stood in Samuel's office reviewing security protocols for the legitimate business operations he was expanding. The encrypted drives had yielded intelligence beyond what we'd initially anticipated. Names, accounts, operational details that painted a comprehensive picture of corruption spanning multiple agencies and criminal organizations. We'd spent weeks carefully deciding which information to leverage, which to expose, and which to keep as insurance against future threats. The decision about what to do with the evidence hadn't been as difficult as I'd expected. Turning it over to law enforcement would have meant trusting institutions that had already failed me once. Using it strategically, however, meant maintaining control while systematically dismantling the networks that had destroyed so many lives. Vincent entered without knocking, his expression carrying the particular tension that meant complications. We have a situation. Marcus Chen is here. He says he's David Chen's brother, and he needs to speak with you immediately. The name hit me like physical impact. David Chen, my former partner, the man who died in Istanbul while I'd held pressure on wounds that wouldn't stop bleeding. I'd known he had family, a younger brother, parents in California, but I'd never contacted them after the operation went wrong. What could I have said that would make any difference? Where is he? I asked, already moving toward the door. Main sitting room. Vincent's hand on my arm stopped me. Boss, he came armed. We confiscated a pistol when he entered. He's angry, looking for answers about his brother's death. Samuel appeared in the hallway, already informed of the situation. Let him speak with Sarah, he told Vincent, but have security nearby. If this goes badly, I want intervention available immediately. The man waiting in the sitting room was younger than David had been, maybe late 20s, with the same dark hair and sharp features, but where David's expression had been open and optimistic. Marcus Chen's face carried the hardened look of someone consumed by grief and rage. He stood as I entered, his hands clenched at his sides. "Sarah Mitchell," he said, my name sounding like an accusation. The woman who got my brother killed. I forced myself to meet his eyes, to not flinch from the judgment I'd already passed on myself 1,000 times. "I'm sorry about David. He was a good agent and a better partner than I deserved." "Sorry?" His voice rose. "You're sorry?" I spent the last 18 months trying to find out what really happened in Istanbul. The agency gave me nothing. Classified mission, operational complications, casualty in the line of duty. His hands shook with controlled fury. Then 3 days ago, I received an anonymous package. Documents, communications, proof that the whole operation was compromised from the beginning. That David was sent to die as part of someone's conspiracy. I felt Samuel's presence behind me, silent support as I processed what Marcus was saying. "You received evidence about Istanbul? Who sent it?" "I don't know. But it led me to investigate Stephen Marsh, and that investigation led me here, to you and Samuel Rossi." His eyes narrowed. "So I'll ask once. Did you know the mission was compromised? Did you let my brother walk into that trap?" "No." The word came out with absolute conviction. "I didn't know. I thought we were running a legitimate asset recruitment operation. When it went bad, when David got shot, I did everything I could to save him. My voice broke despite my efforts to stay controlled. It wasn't enough. I failed him, and I've carried that failure every day since." Marcus stared at me, searching for deception and apparently finding only raw honesty. The document said Stephen Marsh coordinated with agency personnel to set up the operation, that David was collateral damage in a scheme to discredit and recruit compromised operatives. His jaw tightened. "Is that true?" "Yes," I said simply. "We discovered Stephen's involvement 3 weeks ago. He's dead now. Suicide before we could bring him to justice. But his confession confirmed everything. David died because criminals and corrupt officials conspired to create circumstances they could exploit." Samuel stepped forward, his voice calm and measured. "Marcus, I understand your anger. Your brother died serving his country, and you deserve answers. We have extensive documentation about Stephen's conspiracy, including communications that identify the agency personnel who participated. That information is yours if you want it." Marcus's attention shifted to Samuel, suspicion mixing with curiosity. "Why would you give me that? What do you want in return?" "Nothing," Samuel replied. "Your brother was murdered as part of a scheme that also targeted my organization. We have a shared interest in ensuring those responsible face consequences." He gestured to the chairs. "Please sit. Let us show you what we've discovered." The next 2 hours were emotionally exhausting. We walked Marcus through Stephen's operation, showing him the evidence that proved David's death wasn't the result of Sarah's failure, but rather the inevitable outcome of systematic betrayal. I watched his expression shift from rage to grief to determination as he absorbed the truth. "What will you do with this information?" he asked finally, looking between Samuel and me. Samuel leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled thoughtfully. "Some of it we're using to eliminate threats to my organization. Some we're feeding to federal prosecutors through channels that can't be traced back to us." He paused. "And some we're holding as insurance against future attacks." His eyes met Marcus's directly. "The people who killed your brother have more to answer for than one death. They've corrupted institutions, destroyed careers, and operated without accountability for years. Taking them down requires strategy, not just exposure." "I want to help," Marcus said immediately. "Whatever you're doing, I want to be part of it." I started to object. Dragging David's brother into Samuel's world seemed like compounding tragedy rather than addressing it. But Samuel raised a hand, forestalling my protest. "What's your background? Military? Law enforcement?" "FBI?" Marcus answered. "Cybercrime division. I'm good with digital forensics, tracking financial transactions, building cases that hold up in court." His voice carried bitter determination. "And I'm motivated to see justice done, whatever form that takes." Samuel glanced at me, a question in his expression. I nodded slightly. Marcus's skills would be valuable, and maybe giving him purpose would provide better closure than the empty answers the agency had offered. "We can use someone with your expertise," Samuel said. "But understand what you're agreeing to. This isn't official law enforcement work. We operate in gray areas, use methods that wouldn't be admissible in court, and prioritize results over procedure." His tone hardened. "If you work with us, you're accepting that compromise." Marcus didn't hesitate. "My brother's dead because the system failed. I'm done trusting official channels. Whatever it takes to make sure his death meant something, I'm in." The arrangement was settled with the kind of efficiency that characterized Samuel's decision-making. Marcus would provide technical expertise, helping to trace Stephen's network and identify remaining threats. In return, he'd have access to information about his brother's death and the satisfaction of meaningful action against those responsible. After Marcus left with Vincent to begin reviewing encrypted files, I found Samuel on the mansion's terrace, looking out over grounds that had been fortified with additional security measures since the attack. The November air was cold, carrying the scent of coming winter, and he stood with his hands in his pockets, lost in thought. "You gave him purpose," I said, moving to stand beside him. That was kind. Samuel's slight smile was self-deprecating. "I'm not kind, Sarah. I'm practical. Marcus Chen has skills we need and motivation that ensures loyalty." He paused. "But yes, I understand what loss does to people, how it drives us to find meaning in the aftermath." His hand found mine, warm despite the cold. "You've given me something similar, you know." "I've helped clean up your organization's security," I said, deflecting from whatever deeper meaning he was suggesting. "You've given me partnership." His voice was quiet, serious. For 20 years I've been surrounded by people who follow orders, who respect my authority, but fear my power. You challenge me, question my decisions, make me justify my reasoning. His thumb traced across my knuckles. "You make me better at what I do, and you do it while choosing to be here, rather than being trapped by circumstances." "I'm not sure how much choice I really have," I admitted. "Stephen's conspiracy destroyed my alternative options fairly thoroughly. You have more choice than you think." Samuel turned to face me fully. "I have resources, Sarah. I could have helped you disappear, set you up with a new identity somewhere far from this life, ensured you had the financial security to never work again." His dark eyes held mine. "I didn't offer that because I'm selfish, and I want you here. But the option exists, if you want it." The offer was genuine. I could see that in his expression, hear it in his tone. Samuel Rossi, for all his criminal activity and calculated violence, was giving me an exit if I wanted one. No manipulation, no coercion, just honest acknowledgement that I could walk away. "What do you want from this arrangement?" I asked. "Long term, what does my staying here look like?" "Honestly?" His smile was slightly uncertain, a rare vulnerability. "I want you beside me. As my security director officially, since we're expanding legitimate operations, and need someone who thinks strategically about protection." His hand rose to cup my face, but also as my partner in every sense. Someone who understands the complexities of this life and chooses it anyway. Someone I can trust absolutely because we've been through fire together and emerged stronger. It was a declaration wrapped in practical terms, an offer of partnership that encompassed both professional collaboration and something more personal, The kind of relationship that existed in moral gray areas, built on shared trauma and mutual respect, rather than conventional romance. I should have been terrified. Should have recognized this as Stockholm Syndrome or trauma bonding or any number of psychological explanations for why a former CIA operative would consider accepting a life beside a mob boss. But after weeks of working with Samuel, seeing how he operated, understanding the code of loyalty and honor he lived by even while breaking legal codes, it didn't feel like surrender. It felt like choosing a side after years of serving institutions that had proven themselves unworthy of loyalty. "I'm not going to pretend this is a normal relationship," I said finally, "or that I fully understand what I'm agreeing to. But yes, I'll stay, as your security director and as whatever else we become together." Samuel's smile was genuine, relief and satisfaction mixing in his expression. "Then we should make this official." He pulled a small box from his jacket pocket, opening it to reveal a ring. A simple band of platinum with a single diamond, elegant without being ostentatious. "Not an engagement ring," he clarified quickly, "but a symbol of partnership, of the commitment we're making to each other." I stared at the ring, my throat tight. This was real. Not just operational convenience or temporary arrangement, but Samuel Rossi offering me a permanent place in his life and organization. The man I'd once been assigned to investigate, who I should have viewed as an enemy, was now offering something that looked suspiciously like love, even if neither of us had used that word. "I accept," I said, extending my hand. He slipped the ring onto my finger, the weight of it both literal and metaphorical. Together we stood on the terrace as winter approached, two people who'd found unexpected partnership in the aftermath of violence and betrayal. The following months brought transformation I hadn't anticipated. Samuel had been serious about legitimizing his business operations. With Stephen's embezzlement exposed and his corrupt network dismantled, Samuel redirected resources toward legal enterprises. The restaurants expanded. Construction projects won competitive bids based on actual merit. Money laundering gave way to legitimate investment strategies. It wasn't complete transformation. Samuel still maintained connections to his family's traditional operations, still wielded influence in spaces where law enforcement couldn't reach. But the violence decreased. The flagrant criminality receded, and what emerged was something more nuanced than simple mob boss or legitimate businessman. I built a security division that protected both Samuel's personal safety and his business interests. Marcus Chen proved invaluable, his FBI training and technical skills identifying threats before they materialized. Vincent's team expanded, adding former military and law enforcement personnel who valued competence and loyalty over traditional criminal hierarchy. The agency eventually came calling, of course. 6 months after Stephen's death, a representative arrived at Samuel's office requesting a meeting. They wanted the encrypted drives, wanted to handle the prosecution of their corrupted personnel internally, wanted to contain the scandal before it exploded publicly. Samuel and I met with them together, presenting a united front. We provided some evidence, enough to ensure specific individuals faced consequences, but retained documentation that proved our continued value as sources rather than targets. The implicit arrangement was clear. Leave us alone, and we'll help you clean up your mess. Pursue us, and everything becomes public. They accepted the terms with the kind of reluctant pragmatism that characterized intelligence work. My file was quietly amended. Operational failure reclassified as mission compromise outside agent control. Not quite exoneration, but acknowledgement that I hadn't been solely responsible for Istanbul's disaster. David Chen was posthumously awarded a commendation for service. His parents received the recognition they deserved. The truth about his death sanitized but no longer hidden behind complete classification. Marcus attended the ceremony, then returned to his work with our organization, having found purpose in preventing future betrayals, rather than seeking government employment. The private dining room at Ristorante Bellissimo had been completely renovated after the attack, but Samuel still preferred conducting important meetings there. Tonight was different, though, not business associates or family members, but just the two of us. Marking the 1-year anniversary of the night, everything had changed. Marco had prepared a special menu, his way of showing gratitude for the increased business and improved security that came with Samuel's more legitimate operations. We sat across from each other at the table, where I'd first revealed myself, where violence had erupted and set us both on this unexpected path. "Do you regret it?" Samuel asked, his wine glass half raised. "Any of it? The choices you made? The life you accepted?" I considered the question carefully, thinking about the person I'd been 12 months ago. Lost, guilty, hiding from both my past and potential future. That woman seemed impossibly distant now, separated by experiences that had fundamentally reshaped my understanding of morality and loyalty. "I regret David Chen's death," I said honestly. "I regret that corruption and conspiracy destroyed so many lives. I regret that justice is more complicated than I was trained to believe." My hand found Samuel's across the table. "But do I regret choosing this life? Choosing you? No. This is where I'm supposed to be." His smile was warm, the rare vulnerability he showed only in private moments. I never expected to find someone who understood me this completely, who could match my strategic thinking, challenge my assumptions, and stand beside me through everything without flinching. His fingers tightened on mine. "You're remarkable, Sarah Mitchell, and I'm grateful every day that you sent those assassins to interrupt my dinner." I laughed, the sound genuine and unforced. Best terrible decision I ever made. We finished dinner discussing plans for the security division's expansion, identifying candidates for recruitment, strategizing about potential threats from rivals who resented Samuel's increasing legitimacy. It was the kind of conversation that blended personal and professional seamlessly, the partnership we'd built, erasing boundaries between roles. Later, in the private quarters of Samuel's mansion that had become our shared home, I stood at the window looking out over grounds that now felt like territory to protect, rather than a prison to escape. Samuel came up behind me, his arms encircling my waist, his presence warm and solid. "What are you thinking?" he asked, his voice rumbling against my back. "That I spent years serving institutions that taught me to see the world in black and white," I replied. "Good guys and bad guys, legal and illegal, right and wrong." My reflection in the window showed the woman I'd become. Harder than the idealistic operative who'd joined the agency, but also more complete, more honest about moral complexities. Now I live in all the gray spaces between those categories. And somehow, I'm more at peace than I've ever been. Samuel turned me to face him, his expression serious. "We operate in gray spaces, yes, but there are still lines we don't cross. We protect people who can't protect themselves. We honor loyalty and punish betrayal. We use violence only when necessary and never against the innocent." His hand cupped my face. Those principles matter, even if they don't fit conventional definitions of morality. "I know," I said, leaning into his touch. "That's why I stay. Because you're not just a criminal playing at legitimacy. You're someone who built an organization based on codes that mean something, even when they conflict with legal structures. You're complicated and sometimes ruthless, but you're honest about what you are. That's worth more than the institutions that lied about their values while destroying lives." He kissed me then, the gesture conveying emotions that neither of us were particularly skilled at expressing verbally. When we finally pulled apart, his forehead rested against mine, his breath warm against my lips. "I love you," he said quietly. "I know we don't say it often, that we're both too pragmatic for grand declarations. But you should know. Everything I've built, everything I'm becoming, you're central to that. Not just professionally, but in every way that matters." The words settled into spaces I'd kept carefully protected, filling voids that guilt and loss had carved into my psyche. "I love you too," I replied, the admission both terrifying and liberating. Samuel Rossi, mob boss, criminal, strategic genius, and somehow the person who gave me back purpose and partnership when everything else had fallen apart. We stood together in the darkness, two people who'd found unexpected connection in the aftermath of violence and conspiracy. The future stretched ahead, complicated and uncertain, filled with challenges that would require everything we'd learned about survival, strategy, and the complicated nature of loyalty. But we'd face it together. Sarah Mitchell, former CIA operative turned security director, and Samuel Rossi, organized crime figure turned legitimate businessman. Partners in the truest sense, having chosen each other not despite our complicated histories, but because of them. Outside, Brooklyn glittered in the November night. Inside, we began planning the next phase of operations, expanding legitimate businesses, dismantling remaining criminal networks, building something that existed in those gray spaces between law and necessity, using skills honed through violence to create protection rather than destruction. It wasn't redemption in any conventional sense. But standing beside Samuel, committed to the organization we were building together, using my operational expertise to prevent harm rather than serve institutions that had proven themselves unworthy. It felt like purpose, like the second chance I hadn't known I was searching for. And as dawn approached, bringing with it new challenges and opportunities, I understood that this was my life now. Not the one I'd planned, not the one I'd been trained for, but the one I'd chosen when given the chance to define myself on my own terms. Sarah Mitchell, operative and partner, protector and strategist, living in moral complexity and finding peace in the honest acknowledgement of who and what I'd become. The woman who'd saved a mobster's life and found her own in the process.